Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're all good and well. So time for yet more horror content on the Green Man, and this time we're talking about characters that left us too soon. And by that I mean that they died quite early on in the film that they were in, or even the TV series. In a few cases here we've got a few characters from TV series. And so that's what we're going to be dealing with. And I've already come up with some tiers and what we're going to be calling each tier. So the top tier here, what would normally be the S tier, is not recovered. So those are the character deaths from which I really felt an impact from, and I haven't really recovered from their deaths. I was shocked or appalled, or I'd got invested enough in the character to really feel the impact of their death when they died. And we go right down to Nevermind. So those are the characters that I don't really mind that they passed away. That sounds awful, doesn't it? But this is the tier list format. This is what we're dealing with. This is how it works. And yeah, and obviously this is all just fictional anyway, right? That's what it is, just fictional. So, all right, let's start this tier list off this time with Alison Kerry from the first three Saw films. Of course, she is brutally killed off by Amanda in Saw 3. And for me, for her character and what we'd seen of her up to that point, that felt like far too soon to kill off who I thought was a good, kind of honest detective doing her work, doing her day job. And for just doing that, she ends up in this horrific kind of, I think they call it the angel, I can't remember exactly what the name of the trap is now, but it's the one where her rib cage is lifted out of the chest brutally because she wasn't able to. In fact, it was impossible for her to actually win that trap because Amanda rigged it. Now, was quite affected by this when I was actually quite annoyed more than anything that they took this character out of the film, out of Saw 3 so early. I mean, I get that Amanda had this character change and, seemingly suddenly became super brutal for reasons which we may yet actually discover as more Saw films may come our way, actually, thinking about it. But yeah, I was very disgruntled by this. I don't think I've totally recovered. I liked Alison Kerry. And yeah, I've not fully recovered from that experience. So immediately we've got somebody going straight into S tier as the first one. Now, next up is Sergeant Apone. Now, Apone is a popular character, I think, from Aliens. Now, he is a very outgoing sergeant, almost fitting something of maybe a slightly stereotypical kind of sergeant who says lots of kind of sometimes outrageous things, and to get everybody G'd up and everybody into sort of military moods. And he's very charismatic. He's kind of over the top, but that's where the humor value from him and his just general sort of, he does have a certain likability for sure. I think in Aliens, it's no question of that. And actually, when he does, it's kind of annoying because you're like, oh, I was enjoying his one-liners, and even if they're not entirely politically correct one-liners, I was enjoying his one-liners. And I'm like, oh, it felt like he's gone way too soon. He was such a fun character in Aliens, and I was disappointed to see him go, to be honest. So I'm going to put him in Gone But Not Forgotten. I don't think, as a character, he wasn't perfect and stuff. So it's not that necessarily not recovered from Apone's death. There are characters that died in that film I felt more for a little bit, to be honest. To name even Hudson, I kind of felt for him when he went. So, Gone But Not Forgotten for me for Apone. Next up, we got Beth from The Descent, and she was the best friend of Sarah. I did kind of like Beth. I thought that you could see the friendship with Sarah really develop in the early part of the film, particularly. I really liked how they had that bond, a really strong bond, perhaps the strongest bond in terms of the friendships in The Descent. I'm going to put Beth, I think, into Gone But Not Forgotten. Then again, I've got to be more strict with this, otherwise the top tiers are just going to fill up rapidly, very quickly, and we're not going to have anybody in the bottom tiers. To be honest, Beth didn't make as much of an impact on me. I would say, Sarah is obviously, for me, the ultimate kind of transformation in that film as a character, as I showed in the Final Girls list I did recently. So I think I'm going to put Beth into RIP. That's kind of harsh, but I'm just being super kind of tier list strict. That's what we're doing here. So I'm going to put Beth into RIP, but she's close to Gone But Not Forgotten as well. Next up, we've got Brett, portrayed by Harry Dean Stanton from the classic Alien. So we've done Aliens sort of already. Now, of course, I could pick other characters from Alien and Aliens here, but these are just the ones that I thought died, very early on. Actually, there's also John Hurt's character as well. So it's kind of like, some people might be like, well, why did you pick him and not him? So Brett is he's kind of likable, but he's a bit lazy as well, isn't he, in the film, I think. And he's searching for the cats, and he ends up, of course, we all know what happens to him. A kind of grisly demise, I think, for sure, for him. And he's and actually, he's kind of dragged up by the xenomorph. He's not necessarily killed there in an instant, although there was blood, if I remember. Or was there blood? I'd have to rewatch it. But I think Brett was okay as a character. Not for me one of the more memorable ones. I thought for me, obviously Ripley, Lambert, and Parker were very memorable. I feel like Captain Dallas was kind of memorable as well. Less so for me. To be honest, Brett, I'm not really too bothered about it. If we're being strict, I'm going to put Brett into Nevermind. Sorry, Brett. But yeah, if we're being strict, we're being strict here. All right. So next up is Chrissy from Stranger Things 4, a really hugely popular character. I think there was like a social media frenzy about this character, which got way out of control, as I recall. And now, obviously, you've got Eddie Munson in the frame here, and he's not on this list. He's not in the frame here. But that's because I'm not totally convinced he's completely gone from the series, or I reckon it's probably more likely Chrissy has parted. And in the very short screen time she had, Grace Van Dien as Chrissy, boy did she make an impact, particularly with chemistry with Eddie in that scene that everyone talks about now, which I think in terms of modern TV series, the popularity of Stranger Things, that scene's something almost iconic. So I was kind of pretty upset myself when Chrissy died. I thought she was a great character. She was a good, kind person, and the way she was killed off was very disproportionate to that. It was horrible what Vecna did. And, I think many would be angry with me for not putting her in Not Recovered, but actually I genuinely do feel like that was just completely uncalled for what happened to Chrissy. She was a good, kind person, and didn't deserve really to go in that way. And she made an impression in a short space of time, that actress, a very short space of time. So next up, we've got Casey Becker from Scream, one that, to be honest, as iconic as Scream and that even those early scenes are in this film, or how they seem like they feel iconic, Casey Becker as a character, I'm not really all that invested in. I think that Drew Barrymore does very well, actually, at in the time she has, painting this character to us in a very short time frame again. So she does well at that. But as a character, whereas with Chrissy and Alison Kerry here, and Apone, I guess, as well, right? Their characters really stick with you. Whereas I don't personally find that with Casey Becker. So I'm putting Casey Becker in Nevermind. That might be a very hot take. I know that, but this is my tier list. So, it's just my tier list. Let's just say that, I guess. So Hawkins from Predators next. I'm going to put him in RIP again. Not really sort of super memorable to me as a character. In fact, I almost could put him in Nevermind, to be honest. But I don't know. Predators pretty iconic as a film. And if I remember right, he's trying to help that girl, I think, and he ends up getting killed. And there's sort of some level of development, if I remember right, with his character. But yeah, it's not a huge amount. Next up, we've got, really, I regard these as a trio, basically, from what happens to them in basically, they are all in and they all survive in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. But they're all killed off pretty early in A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4. And I remember this is one of those things that upsets a lot of the fandom of the Nightmare on Elm Street, that these three really good characters were killed off, although Kirsten Parker is actually played by a different actress, which kind of affects my feeling towards that character in the fourth film. But I love Patricia Arquette's portrayal in the previous film, so I'm kind of a bit like unsure what to do with her. particularly. I definitely feel like Kincaid went far too soon in 4. He was a really good character. I thought he had some more mileage personally. I thought it was a lot of fun. Joey, I don't know. I think Joey's an RIP. I mean, he was often fooled by Freddie basically being a beautiful woman, generally, and Joey would fall for it every time. Although he's a teenage boy, I guess we can somewhat empathise, as I was once a teenage boy, with that. So he's just falling for a trick which will probably work on most teenage boys, let's be honest. Okay, so let's just think about Kristen. I'm going to put in Gone but Not Forgotten because of Patricia Arquette's portrayal of her in the previous film, in A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. I really liked her as a character in that film. Not recovered though. I don't know about that. You see, Kincaid as a sort of, I'm almost not quite recovered from them. I'm going to leave them in Gone but Not Forgotten. Next up is Noah from The Walking Dead, and here's one that I'm going to put in Not Recovered because his death was so horrific in The Walking Dead season 5. And he did enough, this actor, to portray Noah in a way which was, for me, very, very good. This young guy, I can't remember the actor's name off the top of my head, but he was really great. And he apparently, the actor, after he acted out his own death, was pretty, really got into the moment of his actual death, and he was really quite upset by it afterwards, is what I've read. And it's no surprise. I mean, for me, that is one of the most shocking and traumatic death scenes I think I've ever seen. The nature of it was that, the coward, I think his name was Nicholas, pushing the revolving door. So he ended up being, revolving back into the zombies, and he was eaten alive with his face getting torn off and everything. I haven't really recovered from that one, Noah. I honestly think that was absolutely shocking. Now, many people will say Glenn, and Glenn as well, although I could sort of see that coming for me. With Noah, I didn't see Noah coming. And as much as perhaps I wasn't quite as much invested maybe in him as I would be Glenn, I still felt such an impact from this particular death. I don't think I've fully recovered from Noah's death in The Walking Dead season 5. Absolutely brutal with a capital B. Next up, we've got Norm from The Mist. And Norm was, he wasn't really in it for very long. But his death was very, very memorable and very harsh. So I'm going to put him into RIP. But now I'm thinking, should Brett be in Nevermind? I might change my mind about Brett. I might change my mind because I don't know. I'm going to keep him in Nevermind for now. Now, the next character is very interesting because of how my attitude towards him has somewhat changed over time. So that's Robb Stark from Game of Thrones, a big one here, and one whose death and everything that happens at that wedding, the Red Wedding, one of the most famous scenes in the whole Game of Thrones series, was really shocking and bloody and violent. I mean, even at that time, one of the most violent things I think I'd seen in a TV series was that whole scene, particularly with his pregnant wife being stabbed and everything. It was really quite shocking stuff. But Robb Stark as a character, he made a lot of mistakes. And for me, he wasn't the best of leaders, although, he was brave, he was bold, he was young. For me, he was just outsmarted by the Lannisters. And I think he could have made a lot more smarter decisions than he did strategically. He made some pretty bad decisions, and he was caught out by the Lannisters because of that. And I've lost some sympathy with his character, maybe, although not for what happened to him, in the most shocking and brutal way. I do feel sympathy for that. Obviously, I mean, who would want that to happen to them, right? It's absolutely appalling. But thinking from the perspective of Game of Thrones and the strategy stuff and the tactics and the politics, I don't really care so much anymore about it. Perhaps that's because of how Game of Thrones finished as well. But I actually can't believe this, but never mind for Robb Stark. Can I believe myself doing that? I guess it doesn't really bother me much anymore. I have recovered from that. Perhaps not from the Red Wedding as a whole, but Rob Stark, I don't really feel so much of a grief there or anything like that. Grief, not grief. You know what I mean? Sympathy. Next up, Annie Brackett from Halloween. I'm going to put her in RIP. I think she was a good friend of Laurie Strode's, and you know, pretty likable, I guess, on the whole. Her sarcastic sense of humor is one of the things that kind of stands out. She did a lot of babysitting, as I recall, and yeah, she was all right. I wouldn't say never mind to Annie, but I don't feel strongly enough about her necessarily to put her up higher on this tier list. So we move on now to Robert Muldoon. Now, that's not the former Prime Minister of New Zealand. This is Robert Muldoon from Jurassic Park, played by Bob Peck, who actually passed away in real life in 1999, I think, as I remember. So this is a legendary kind of Jurassic Park iconic. He has an iconic moment in the scene where he says, "Clever girl," and then he's pounced on by the velociraptors and stuff. For me, he is very memorable. I don't know what it is. It's kind of cool, calm, collected. He seems like he's got things under control, even though in that scene, obviously, he's lost control and the Raptors have outsmarted him. But up until that point, he does seem like a cool head and a smart guy. And I just love the way that he's portrayed by Bob Peck, particularly. It just makes him very memorable. I can never forget his portrayal because of the iconic line of "Clever Girl" and everything else in Jurassic Park being an absolutely great and an incredible film. That Robert Muldoon, for me, goes into Gone But Not Forgotten. All right, next up, we've got, this has been interesting doing this, actually, not quite as I expected. So we have got two characters from Friday the 13th Part 2, which is actually probably my favorite from that franchise, although I've not seen every single Friday the 13th film. Like, I've not seen 6, 7, or 8 yet, I think. But I liked these two characters. I remembered them, and I think it's because they sort of have this gradually blossoming romance going on. This is Mark Jarvis, who's the guy in the wheelchair, of course, and you've also got Vicky Perry, who seems like his kind of interest, and the two start developing chemistry. And I liked, there was something like nice about it, their pairing in this film, and it felt more sincere than any other or many other relationships or romances in Friday the 13th, although, you know, obviously them getting together was going to be sex, I think, if it were to happen. But it still felt like something was just, there was something there. And so I was kind of quite devastated when Mark has his face slashed by Jason, and his chair goes back down the stairs, the steps. And I kind of found that, like, I was like, oh, that's really terrible. Like, that actually affected me. So I actually think these two are both going to go into Gone But Not Forgotten for me. Two of the more memorable characters. For some reason, they just stick out in my mind. And I guess maybe it was because of, some level of sympathy I felt for them both, or empathy, or whatever. But yeah, Mark and Vicky from Friday the 13th Part 2 just felt kind of like it had some level of impact on me when they both went, despite Friday the 13th not being known for its depth of characters. Lastly, we've got Tina Gray here from A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, I'm going to have to put her into Not Recovered, despite her only being in that film for about 20 minutes or so. Here's why. Because of that one scene being so horrific in every way. And I don't think, although, she was kind of a normal teenage girl to me in the way she was, played, and the character was painted. But, just that absolutely shocking death scene, which still makes me kind of, recoil when I see it, at how nasty it was when Freddie's kind of first real victim, and it was just absolutely nasty as all hell. It stuck with me over time, and because I don't think she seemed like an okay person and everything as well at that young age. I mean, perhaps you could now argue a few of these others I could have put up high, but just because of the death scene, it's really stood out. as being very disproportionate to who she was as a person, as a perfectly normal teenage girl. To go through that was just absolutely just appalling. That's not to say some of these other deaths weren't as well, they were, but it's how they stick in their mind as characters in the films or in the TV series, and how the death is kind of disproportionate to their circumstances. I should have said that at the start, but that's the kind of criteria I'm trying to work towards here. I don't know how this has ultimately turned out. This is where we finished. We got 3 in Nevermind. Casey Becker. I was thinking with Brett, I'm torn between putting him in RIP and Nevermind, but in contrast to the other characters in Alien, for me, he's one of the weaker characters. Rob Stark, Nevermind. Rest in peace. We've got Beth from The Descent, Hawkins from Predator, Joey from Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and 4, Norm from The Mist, and Danny Brackett. And then you got the Gone But Not Forgotten. These are the characters I do really like, but they've not quite, they're ones let's say I've recovered from. I've more or less recovered from these ones, I guess, but they're all very standout. So you got the likes here of Sergeant Apone, Kincaid, of course, Kristen Parker, Robert Muldoon, and then Mark and Vicky from Friday the 13th Part 2. And then the ones I haven't recovered from up here, we've got Tina Gray, Noah from Walking Dead, Chrissy from Stranger Things, and Alison Kerry from Saw 3. I'm sure there are many, many more that I could have included here. To be honest, probably even more striking as deaths and having had some investment from the characters that have gone from us too soon. Thanks very much all for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. More horror content is yet on the way with another first watch tier list. So those are the horror films I watched for the first time, and I put them into different tiers based on how much I like them. So that's to come next. Thanks as always for watching. Don't forget to drop a sub if you're new to the channel. Otherwise, from me, bye for now.